Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the last day of April and Friday afternoon at the Manor. And here we are. It's hard to imagine that April is coming to a rapid close, and then May is just around the corner. And that old proverb of March winds and April showers bring forth May flowers. Well, we're getting lots of showers. We'll see if they end in May. Probably not. But Susan, as our
Hi.
wonderful person, our captain, over to you.
Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming today. We're welcoming back Kelly Snow, who is at the Department of Human Geography at the University of Toronto. And he's got another message for us about the environment and what we can do to help it. So Kelly.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, I'm actually going to give a lecture, or I'm going to give a presentation that I give to my students in a course I teach on environmental planning. Because
do you want me to make a co-host, Kelly?
Yeah, I'm going to need to share a screen.
Okay, so I made you co-host, and then you can share a screen. Good.
Okay, so I have a presentation for you guys that I give to my students when we introduce the issue of climate change, and it's really not what it's really just it's a lecture with a few lectures behind it. So I'll skip through some of the beginning stuff and get to how climate change is affecting Toronto directly. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. But first of all, I should say that I have a hard stop at 2:20. Okay, because I have to go pick up Bella at 2:30, and she's a few minutes away. So, so we can start, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Can you guys see my screen?
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so this is what the topic is today, this afternoon. And as I said, I give this lecture or presentation at the beginning of when we start to consider climate change in the environmental planning course I teach at U of T Scarborough. And so I guess we can just get started. Now, as many of you are aware, our weather, hang on a sec. Our weather is changing. Okay, so and how is this going to be affecting Toronto? Well, we can expect in summary, hotter, drier summers and extreme rainfall events. And I'm going to get to that, exactly how it's playing out thus far in this, I guess, environmental process. But basically, we're talking about climate change due to the release of greenhouse gases, or CO2, by human activities. That's the important thing. These are human-generated activities, primarily through the use and burning of fossil fuels. And here's an interesting slide. This is from 2018, I believe. And this is the Greenland ice cap, the largest, if not one of the largest, in the world. And you can see that as of July 12th, at least almost 100% of the surface of this ice cap had started to melt. Okay, and so this is just an indication of something that's changing, because that's the image on the right, and on the left we've got something taken about 30 years ago. So you can see there's definitely something changing. So what can we anticipate due to these changes that are happening? Well, we can anticipate changes in rainfall, and these are going to come in the form of less snow and more rain in the winter, more rain in July, and about 80% more, and in August, about 50%. extreme daily rainfall. We can expect around fewer rainstorms with greater than 25 millimeters in winter and the same number of storms in the summer, but it's the intensity that's the difference. And I'm going to get into that in a few minutes. And then we have a couple of graphs here that demonstrate change in temperatures over time, in rainfall and in snowfall. Okay, so again, in some, less snow, more rain in winter, more rain in July and August, and they're going to be much more intense events. Warmer temperatures, we can anticipate a warmth change in about 4 degrees average by 2040, which is less than 20 years away. We can expect an annual temperature increase by 4.4. The winter will increase by about 5.7 Celsius degrees, and the average summer temperature will increase by 3.8. Extreme daily minimum temperatures are less cold by 13 degrees. So if the average in January used to be -20, it's now going to be about -7. Okay. Extreme daily maximum temperatures become warmer by 7.6 degrees. So these are just stats that really are just, you know, numbers and so on. And we'll get to how it actually affects us in a few minutes. So here's some number of hot days. These are days that are considered dangerous by public health. So we've got between 1961 and 1990, we had around less than 20 a year. We are currently looking at around 25 hot days or over 30 degrees. If you look at 2020 to 2040, so we're already in that range. And coming up by 2080, we're going to be looking at over almost 70 hot days a year, over 30 degrees. So this is an extreme change in our climate over a very short amount of time in terms of geological time. Okay, so we're looking at a shift in a 2-degree shift in temperature in terms of becoming warmer. We're looking at extreme hot days increasing by about three times, if you look at this graph here. So what are the impacts on Toronto itself? So more extreme weather events results in heavy rain, flash floods, winds, freezing rain, so on, tornadoes even. And there's damage to building, sewer and transportation infrastructure, electrical systems, and so on, which cause blackouts, which are dangerous and it's difficult to manage, especially in times like we're experiencing now. And we're not only talking about events in the summer, we're also talking about events like the ice storm that occurred a few years ago. I think that was 2014. Things like that. So there'd be odd sort of things that occur more frequently. And we're talking about climate, which is different than weather, because weather is what's happening outside right now, but climate is something that happens over time, like on a consistent basis. So there's a difference between weather and climate. This is going to result, the change in temperature is going to result in many different things. Our ecosystems will be changing, which will result in increased stress to vulnerable ecosystems, trees, and so on. So you can see there's damage to homes. Disease vectors such as mosquitoes and black-legged ticks will become more frequent. Their season will become longer, and they will become more of a problem. This will also enable species that have not previously been in this region to move into it as it warms. And these ecosystems, they're set up with defense mechanisms that often deal with harmful pests and so on in their own system as it changes, as something say, moves north as the temperature increases, the defense mechanisms are not as strong, or they're not the same as they were in areas where these pests or other things such as that are more prevalent because they've been there for so much longer, right? So we're talking about a very rapid change in ecosystems that are not necessarily designed to do that, to deal with it. A good example of this, of course, is the black-legged tick, the vector of Lyme disease. You can see the increasing northern range that it will we will experience, and this will become more and more of a public health issue as more people who are not necessarily used to dealing with the threat of Lyme disease and black-legged ticks as it moves north and encounters more different populations that it hasn't encountered in the past. So, in terms of changes in our climate, what can we anticipate as far as impacts in Toronto? So we can expect more heat waves, smog days, related illnesses and deaths. So it's multifaceted. There's pollution, there's health issues, of course, stress on electrical systems, and declining lake levels, which is a little counterintuitive as to what's happened lately, which I'm going to talk about. But we can expect over time, in general, declining lake levels. Okay. So smog days have really reduced, though, I should point that out, since we've stopped burning coal in Ontario. And but there are moments or times that I will show where this is an issue. Particulate matter. So how does this affect vulnerable populations? So heat is very, very dangerous to people who are homeless, low income, have poor housing conditions, who have limited mobility. Of course, lack of insurance. People who have a lack of insurance or savings are very vulnerable to heat if they don't have proper housing and so on. And this, of course, includes isolated seniors, and infants and small children. Okay. Now, one of the things I should point out, and before I say talk about my next slide, is that I'm teaching planning students. And so we talk a lot about buildings and so on. And so buildings are a big part of these courses and learning about how buildings impact the environment. And so here's just a quick summary, a slide here. Buildings account for about 50% of the use of natural resources, about 52% of total water consumption. This is the construction, operation, and general life of the building. When a building comes down, often it ends up in landfills. There's millions of tons of waste on an annual basis, and they also release a lot of greenhouse gas. Okay. So this is mitigated in Toronto by good transit use, at least pre-pandemic times. And about 30% of Toronto's greenhouse gas emissions result from operating buildings. And so it's important that there are ways of making buildings more sustainable, which is something that we talk about. So let's look at a couple of examples, some of which you guys will be familiar with in terms of overall changes in our climate. We can think about last summer, 2020, when essentially wildfires were consuming California, Oregon, and in Washington. And so this was something that was so significant that you could see it from space. You can see here the plume that is out over the Pacific. Like that's a huge, huge cloud. And that's smoke from burning fires. And in a way, it's good it's going over the ocean, because if it goes the other way like this, we're looking at it impacting us. And this is an image taken from last summer from Toronto Islands during the wildfires in California. So you can see it looks like a really, really heavy smog day, but this is particulate matter from the burning forests in California, Oregon. and Washington. Okay, so the next example we'll talk about, fall 2019, when the land down under was essentially on fire. So this was extremely tragic. About 1 billion animals lost their lives. Here's a couple of images that are pretty sad. Koala bears and so on. So the impact is, of course, on humans, but it's also really impacting the biodiversity and and nature in general, like the human, emissions, human-generated emissions of CO2 causing changes in climate, which is directly affecting many, many species. Spring 2017, a couple of years before that, we had extreme flooding on the islands. I don't know if you remember. Again, a little counterintuitive to the overall general change in climate resulting in lower lake levels, but the increased unseasonal rain at the time caused this, caused the lake to actually rise, and which was something that hasn't happened in a long, long time. Okay, May 2016. This is 5 years ago already. I have a lot of family in Alberta, so this was kind of an important event. Lightning strikes ignited a fire in the Canadian boreal forest around Fort McMurray, Alberta, and started one of the largest wildfires we've ever seen in Canada. Now, when you're talking about planning, it's important to keep in mind that there are different, when we're planning our communities and we're planning for climate change, we have to look at these things that, that we call the interface and the intermix. So there's the wild urban interface, which is where the built form or human built communities actually bump up against, let's say nature or the forest or the, in this case, the boreal forest. And then there's an intermix where houses are right in the middle of it. So there's a difference. And you have to plan differently for each context. It's not, like in some cases, it's hard to imagine exactly what you could do to plan for something like this, but there are options, and I'll talk briefly about those. As we know, Fort McMurray was completely evacuated. It was just an incredible sight to see everyone leaving. It was very, there was fire right on the side of the road. This is interesting. In these wildfires, they create their own microclimate. And you can see this image here, which is a photograph. And here's a rendering of something very similar. Now, what happens is the ground becomes positively charged, the cloud becomes negatively charged, and then above the negative charges are, again, positive charges. And so as it moves, which is due to the heat underneath it, it's moving forward, it's creating a charge which results in lightning strikes, which basically causes the fire to grow and causes more fire to ignite in front of it. And so this thing is a self-perpetuating monster. And these things that are occurring in California, Australia, and in Canada are due to drier, less rainfall, and drier conditions, and so on. So here we have an example. This is the Fort McMurray fire. This is the interface, you would call it here. And behind it, I believe, would be more of an intermix. Here's another map. You can see this is when the fire was actually in the town, in the city. And you can see this is a real interesting, this is a good case of a urban wild interface. So it's meeting the forest, it's not necessarily integrated into it. Okay, so that's our last image of Fort McMurray, but oh no. It seems. Okay. Are you guys just getting a blank screen?
Yeah. Yes, yes.
Okay.
Did the presentation go to the Twilight Zone? Or?
This is a PDF that I'm sharing with the screen with, so I don't think the PDF loaded properly. So what I'll do is I'm going to close it.
Okay.
Just wait, just hang tough.
We'll pause for station identification. Okay.
And then I will open it up again.
Yes. Well, it's good you know to do that. I'm sure you had this journey before. This is fascinating, Kelly. Oh my.
Thank you. Can you guys still see my screen?
We can still see your screen, yes.
And you see it, you can see the presentation again?
We can see March the 2nd.
Oh, you did what?
March the 2nd, 2021. We see our weather is changing. Yeah.
Okay, so you see the screen. You see the slide. Okay.
Yes.
Let me see if it's open, if it's opened all the way. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so here we were. This is an image of Fort McMurray. I thought it's particularly poignant of a playground. The damage in the city was incredible, and it was actually, I think, a miracle that no one lost their lives. Anyway, so here's what we can do in terms of planning. Like, there are things that you can do in terms of planning your built form or planning neighborhoods and so on that can help reduce the damage to these, which will help adapt communities to climate change. It won't necessarily mitigate the causes of it, but it will certainly adapt our communities, which I think is, in terms of communities in the north, in the boreal forest, these are things that are going to have to be considered. This is a good one. There's many different ways that you can manage this threat. Not necessarily saying that they're going to all be effective, but there are different things. So you can do it through landscaping, watershed management plans, forest management plans. These are not necessarily urban planning areas of responsibility, but they certainly would be provincially. There's building codes, how you build buildings, the materials that are used can be sensitive to the pressures of climate change. You can talk about land use and development codes, something that I work on. Subdivision design standards, maybe separation distances, and so on. And then of course, local governments need to, work with by using bylaws and so on to help control and mitigate some of these threats through land use. So these would be land use control instruments that could be used to help mitigate. And I'm sure that in Fort McMurray, they must have thought of this at some point. I just don't think that the intensity and scale was what was anticipated. And so that's probably what took everyone by surprise, like the speed in which the fire came, the intensity and size of it, like the way it was just so big, so quickly. And then as I mentioned, it becomes a self-perpetuating machine. It becomes a monster that you can't control. It almost becomes alive. Like, and I think forest firefighters talk about it like that. It becomes almost like a beast that you have to like fight. So that's wildfires, the threat of wildfires. We talk about that in the course I teach in environmental planning as becoming an increasing threat to communities in like all over the world, as we mentioned. But we'll look at a couple of examples now that are specific to Toronto that I'm sure you guys will remember. Let's begin with July the 8th, 2013. It's hard to believe, it's like 8 years ago almost. But this is Toronto on that afternoon. I was working in Metro Hall on the 22nd floor, where I had been for quite some time. And I think it was around 3 o'clock. I forget, but it was like suddenly it got extremely dark. I don't know if you guys recall this, but it was this storm rolled in, and I don't know if you can see on your screens, but the sky became almost greenish. And so this is Toronto on July 8th, 2013. We've got a few here. This one I think was taken from my office window. And you can see the storm front. It was actually like a giant, you know, those movies when the alien enormous ship rolls over the city. That's what it was like. Okay, so it became darker and darker and more surreal. Okay, and we'll talk about this. And it poured an immense amount of rain. Okay, and I've got a few images just showing that, which are just, in a way, they're just spectacular because it was coming down like unbelievable. And then, of course, you know, we all had to try and get home, and this is what it looked like. So I think you guys probably recall, like, I mean, if any of you were out, maybe we can talk about that. But I was downtown and I had to get home, and which is up here. And I tell you, it took me a long time. Here's Union Station. Okay. This is under Simcoe. I don't know if you recall that. Okay. And here's just a few images. Now, what happens is there's so much pressure. If you look to the left there, the top left, if you look, there's so much pressure on the stormwater pipes that these, I guess, manhole covers that are called, they're steel, and they're meant to be so heavy that you can't pick them up because they don't want people going down there. But the water was you can blast them right off. You know, the pressure can just take them right off of there. And so you can see that was a famous image on the bottom right. I think that's a Ferrari. The poor guy, he's trying to get home. I think that's underneath Simcoe. Okay. And here's some images from pretty close by down in the valley. This is Bayview's just to the right. This is looking south, and this is the Don Valley. Okay, and people were stuck on there for about 4 hours, right? Snakes on a train. See that? It's a water snake coming in. Right. And so I had a colleague of mine, she was stuck on this train, this exact train, for 4 hours. She was on her way home. She got caught. And then finally they got him off. Okay, so let's talk about, so that was one example of an extreme rain event that has occurred in Toronto that was quite memorable. And let's talk about August 19th, 2005, which is probably one of the most interesting examples of this in terms of images, because we were able to capture some that are really quite important to illustrate what we're dealing with. So this was the same sort of thing. The sky darkened. These are photos from North York. The sky darkened and suddenly started pouring rain, like just unbelievable amounts of rain. So I again was working downtown at Metro Hall that day, and I can remember, this is kind of funny. I was just about to leave, and I was going to go meet some friends of mine after work, and so I quickly took the elevator down. I left and I took the elevator down, and as I was in the elevator, I was like, oh, I got to walk to this. I got to walk over to this pub. I wish I'd gone to the washroom beforehand. And so just as I got out of the elevator, the power cut. And so I was imagining that it was quite possible that I could have been caught in this elevator for like a couple of days. But anyway, so rain started coming down like crazy. This is, as I said, North York. And it was, again, very, very intense. There was water in the roads, the sewer system, the stormwater systems could not deal with it. Okay, and so cars were getting stranded, they were getting stuck, stalling in the water. Water was coming into basements, the immense amounts, and it was also putting a huge amount of pressure on our infrastructure. So this is the Finch, this is Black Creek, and this is Finch, and you can see that there's, this is the ravine here, and there's maybe 1 billion tons of water backed up and trying to get through this culvert here to get to underneath Finch to the other side. So you can see that it's causing some damage here. It's buckling. The police already have it taped off. It's getting more and more serious. This is taken from a series of photographs that were taken from an apartment building that was just adjacent, looking down. And you can see that it just started to, the pressure was too much. And then the water, it became completely uncontrollable as the water began to, like this, it's all backed up here, right? And it has nowhere to go. So it's gonna keep coming down. It kept coming down more and more and more and more. And then the infrastructure collapsed. So this is the culvert, and it completely collapsed. It could not handle it, the pressure. Just think of the amount of weight that's on this thing. And so it totally blasted through and took out this portion of Finch. I think probably some of you recall this. And this is illustrates the type of pressure that our infrastructure will be under on a more frequent basis. And it's important to remember that the city was not built to deal with these kinds of rain events. And so our infrastructure is not really designed to handle these, this kind of capacity. And so here's the damage. Here's all the different types of infrastructure that were affected: pathways, cables, basic maintenance holes, water mains, gas mains, all of these different types of things that we depend on in our daily lives, right? So this was an event that affected them all. And so here's an actual photo of it down in the ravine. And here is an image of what they built to replace it. So it's much larger culvert. You can see probably twice, maybe 3 times the size. And it has a spill over here to handle more water if there's pressure, if this culvert can't handle it all. So it can start coming through here as well. So it's sort of like an overflow valve. So this is what they did in order to deal with these types. So they did this after quite a bit of study, and they were able to come up with this design here that is apparently, supposedly going to be quite effective in case, if this ever were to happen again. But of course it won't happen here. It'll happen just where there isn't a culvert like this. So let's look at this as an example as to the cost to this. Okay, so let's take a look here. 2005 storm, $4 million to rebuild one culvert. Okay, $3 million to help people who were uninsured. There's $40 million to repair other city infrastructure that were damaged. So $47 million to the cost of to the city of Toronto for one single storm event. Okay. In addition to that, we had commercial, like automobile insurance was around 300 million payouts. So all of those, repaired and so on. And then the sewer backup payouts. Now, this is related to when the sanitary sewer system, the stormwater system flows into it and causes backups. This is the old system in Toronto. It's combined. It's called combined. So on one side, it's like a W. And then on one side is the sanitary system, where you'd call it the brown water goes. And then on the other side, the other groove is the stormwater. And so that's where the stormwater pours into. Now, when an event like that happens, as you can see, it'll overflow the storm side and it will flow into the sanitary side, and it mixes everything up. And then the water can't go anywhere, as we saw from the images from Finch there, and it starts to back up. And I don't know if any of you have ever had this happen, but what happens is those drains in your basement, like water, combined water from the storm and sanitary sewer systems starts to flow into your basement, and it flows up and up, and it's like putrid. It's disgusting. So anything you have down there is destroyed. It's like, you know, you can't clean it. And so $300 million in sewer backup payouts. So it's a pretty expensive event. Okay. Now, what everyone likes to do, or should do, I think, is compare this to what is known here in Toronto as the storm of the century, which would have been Hurricane Hazel. Of course, happened in 1954, October of 1954. Basically, a hurricane tracked up the coast of the United States, moved inland, and parked itself over top of Toronto. Okay, now Toronto had rain for 2 or 3 weeks before this, and so the ground was saturated, and there wasn't much planning in terms of floodplains, like understanding floodplains, and so on. And so there was a lot of people that lived in ravines, and basically because of the saturated ground due to the previous rainfall, the amount of rain that fell, which was ultimately 285 millimeters in just 48 hours, had to flow over the streets into the ravines. It washed houses away. It caused an immense amount of damage. And 81 people lost their lives. 32 houses were washed away. 4,000 people were left homeless. And in today's dollars, it was about $1 billion of damage. So this is one storm in 1954 over 48 hours, which really is the benchmark for what we should be comparing the use of how we design our infrastructure and so on, and plan our cities. And so we've been doing this for a long time, planning for these kinds of events. And that's why there's no development in ravines. And we're trying to maximize softscaping and reducing hard surfaces and so on. But still, it was a really, really significant rain event. And just to put it into perspective a little bit, it says 300 million tons of water fell during that storm. And that's equivalent to all of the water going over Horseshoe Falls here in 1.5 days. So I know you've all seen Niagara Falls, and it's actually a little mind-blowing how much water keeps continually flowing over those waterfalls. And it just sort of, it's just, you know, it's where is this water coming from, right? So it helps you understand how much water fell during that storm, that one storm in 1954. Now here's where things, I think, in my opinion, get really interesting. Okay, which illustrate changes in our climate. Now you can see on the left at the top, 285 millimeters of rain fell over 48 hours. Okay, on July 8th, 2013, we had 126 millimeters of rain. And then on August 19th in 2005, we had 122 millimeters of rain. But if you look over to the right, the circle graph, on July 8th, 2013, 126 millimeters fell in 6 hours. Okay, so it's much, much more intense. Probably to like a factor of 5 or 6, right? Compared to Hurricane Hazel. And then you look at a more extreme example, and that was August 19th. And you can see that 122 millimeters fell in 1 hour. Okay, so we're talking about extremely intense rain events, which are modeled to become more frequent. And so we have to plan our cities better to deal with this. And that's, there's one last graph that just shows typical rainfall. The last highest amount of rainfall on July 8th, was in 2008, and that was 29, almost 30 centimeters. So much, much, much less. So I usually go through this with my students. I'll go through it quickly. So what is the City of Toronto doing in other words, what can we do to plan our cities? How can we plan our cities more effectively to deal with this? And so there's different actions, there's different types of actions that can be used to combat climate change, if you want to use those words. Mitigation, adaptation. So you try and reduce, and mitigation, you try and reduce the effects of climate change by reducing the release of carbon. And that's what Paris and all the other agreements are about. But then there's also adaptation, which is building our cities in a way that are going to deal with this changing climate. And so what is Toronto doing? These are examples of it, different types. There's overlap. It's a Venn diagram. Ahead of the storm. This is a document that the city put out back in 2008. It's been updated since. This is just an older cover. Many different city divisions are responsible, and this is actually part of the problem with dealing with climate change, is that our bureaucracies were designed to deal with issues that they weren't facing back then. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and so on. And so they're put into silos when coordination is really something that needs to occur. Now, there's obviously the city's getting much better at it, but it is sometimes difficult to transcend the different responsibilities of these, I'll call them silos, because you can see on the right the names of all the different divisions or agencies that are responsible for different areas of city building and city management. Here's something that's interesting that public health did in terms of overlaying rental units with buildings higher than less than 5 stories or higher than 5 stories. You can see that there's concentrations of them, and then they created a vulnerability index based on census tract income. And so you can see that these are areas where public health makes an effort during heat waves to go and check on people. Now, bringing this to present day, our current situations, I bet, now I haven't done this, but I bet that we could overlay a map of hotspots in Toronto, and it would probably reflect this same information, because this is where people who are low income tend to be seniors, newcomers, and so on, in lots of large rental units, and so on, where rates of transmission are very high, and where there's a lack of air conditioning, there's a lack of opportunities to cool if it's a heat wave, and so on. So I think that there's probably a parallel in this. Maybe not exactly, but there would be. I can see some of the neighborhoods, even the ones over there. Thorncliffe Park is here. Whoops. This is Thorncliffe, right? I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but you can see that. That's Thorncliffe. Okay. So it's just an example of something the city is doing. They're mapping out areas of vulnerability, and they make an effort during heat waves to go and check on vulnerable populations. This was in the news. I just put this in there as an example. So what is the city doing in terms of building buildings or regulating the built form? Well, we have this tool, this important tool. I helped to work on this in the ecology section. It's called the Toronto Green Standard, and V3 stands for version 3. This is the 3rd iteration of this document. It basically defines what a green building is in the city of Toronto. And so a development application has to confirm through the site plan process that they have met everything that's required of the green standard. So that's one way that the city is addressing the issue of buildings and making them more sustainable. Now, this deals with new buildings only, not existing. The city doesn't have jurisdiction over that. That would be a provincial matter. And so perhaps the building code could be used. It's being revised currently. A new version of it's coming out, I think, relatively soon, and there will be a process to begin revising that one shortly. Comes out around every 5 years or so. So we're also trying to increase the tree canopy, tree planting initiatives, urban naturalization. This is St. George Street at U of T. You can see it's got a lot of greenery there. It's very, in a few years, this is a few years ago, but even now it's the canopy's filling in and it looks really, really beautiful. It provides shade, places to sit and rest and so on if it's really hot, and also absorb rainwater. So there's more green space where the water can go. This is permeable pavement and so on. Another thing that you guys are familiar with, I'm sure, sustainable sidewalks. Civicell's very long tree pits where trees can be planted, where their branches, where their roots can spread out. You can see these along Bayview, along the east side of Bayview for sure. Those long tree pits that look like they're all, it looks like they're a different material than the sidewalk, that's permeable. So if you pour water on it, it'll go through, and it allows for water to collect and provide water for the tree to sustain itself over periods of time where it may be drier over the summer and so on, which will result in a healthier tree, which over time results in a nicer tree canopy and a better quality of life. And, you know, the east side of Bayview in the afternoon today is very, very hot on the summer day. And in a few years though, when these trees start to mature and the canopy fills out, it's going to be a really beautiful stretch due to the shade it provides and so on. Okay, so in terms of those backflow, your basement flooding, the city has a program to install backflow valves, which will stop the flow of water, reverse flow of, if you want to call it water, into your basement. It'll automatically stop it, and it'll provide a barrier which will stop it from leaking into your home. So there's a program to help residents install these in their basements, in their homes, if they wish. We're also working on sustainable parking lots. This is, again, permeable paving. So it allows for the water to go through it instead of flow over and into a small area, a small drain pipe or so on. So it filters into the ground, which helps reduce the pressure on the gray infrastructure, the pipes that are underneath the ground. And this allows for the ground to soak up water and do what it would naturally do anyway, right? Okay. We've been doing some mapping, which is quite interesting, showing hot zones in the city. You can see that this is, if you look at this thermal mapping, you can see there's a hot spot and a cool spot. It's related very obviously, I think you guys would all guess, it's like two buildings, and then green space would be the cool spot. And so we have green roof incentive programs to help building owners install green roofs. It's not feasible on all types of buildings, but we certainly encourage it where it can be done. And we help pay for that. There's programs to help get that done. And what it does, it provides shade, it cools the building, insulates it in the winter, it cools it in the summer, insulates it better in the winter. It also provides some habitat for different species, pollinators, birds even, so on. Who knows what's living up there, and so on. So there's a lot of positives to green roofs that the city is encouraging. And basically, that's my presentation. This is an article I was recommending to my students to read just for debate, for a matter of debate, so that we could debate whether or not we can actually do something about it. And so this is an article in the New Yorker, which I thought was quite good. So this Franzen is arguing that, you know, it's coming no matter what we do. We need to admit that we can't stop it, and so that's how we have to deal with it. But that's not everyone's perspective, but it's one that it's good for classroom discussion. And so I think that's next week, guys. We have our midterm, and so I hope you all were listening. But anyway, yeah. So that's it. I can stop sharing now. How do I, okay, here we go, stop share.
Perfect. Well, that's amazing. That was great. I mean, let me just take you off spotlight so we can see other people. And 1 second. There we are. And I'm sure people have questions because, oh, that was amazing, Kelly. Wow. Truly lots of food for thought. So, Susan, do you mind? Why don't we start with Susan, and then we'll try to keep an eye on who's wanting.
I
Okay,
find it
over to you, Susan.
interesting that you're showing us this right when there was this huge building boom, especially on Bayview and all over, and our premier is like gung ho. We need all these huge buildings. Is there? I don't know. Do you think they really understand this? What the impact is?
Well, I'm going to speak. I'm not a city employee at this moment. Well, I am, but I'm not wearing my city employee hat. Or I would say that it almost becomes ideological at a certain point. Certain parties will accept it more, and certain parties are pandering to interests in the economy or society that are necessarily as not as sensitive or as accepting of this issue. And so you can see that they're talking about building a 400 series highway, developing parts of the Greenbelt, and so on. But you know, they're not entirely bad. They're just like mostly bad. In my opinion. But anyway, I don't know if they get it.
Right.
I know that some parties get it more.
So I noticed that they're building a massive, I think they're sewer pipes, if I'm not mistaken, or floodwater pipes in the Don Valley right now. And they say you could literally drive a Mack truck in the middle of it. And is that to expedite and anticipate some of what we just saw in that other picture? Or what's it? I've been following some of it. Do you have an insight on that, or?
Where were those pipes?
In the Don River Valley, there are massive amounts near the bridge of, let me think.
It's near the Bloor
Viaduct, but also
Viaduct, just to the north of it, beside Bayview Avenue.
And also in the Queen Street Bridge, and also in the East and West Riverdale Park. You'll notice massive pipes. They're sinking in the ground, and it says, I think it says stormwater plan for the City of Toronto.
Yeah. The city has something called the Wet Weather Flow Master Management Plan.
That's it. Yes.
And it's basically a 100-year plan to deal with how we refurbish. It goes in 25-year increments. I think they're still in the first increment, right. But it's basically meant to, because the city was built without these types of. Sorry, it looks so dark. I don't know how to fix that. Looks like I'm just a shadow talking.
That's better. That's better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the city was built with obviously very old technology, like the basic downtown parts of it, and much of the infrastructure in the 50s and 60s was not meant to deal with these types of even populations, and then of course now we have these weather events. So they're probably upgrading sewer, sanitary, and stormwater mains in those areas. It could also, if the ones in the Don Valley, those could also possibly be part of the renaturalization of the mouth of the Don, which is an attempt to take out the Keating Channel and let the Don sort of renaturalize down there. Yeah. I would think that would be a couple of the options that those were being used for. You know, back in the day when they were building a lot of this infrastructure,
yes,
they didn't necessarily build it under roads. They built it in the ravine systems. And so, like for instance, in Taylor Massey Creek, there's a really, really old sanitary sewer pipe that, you know, these things wear out after a while. And so it's kind of a shame because you have to take heavy machinery down into the ravine, into the water almost, and dig it up and repair the pipes, right? So they don't do that anymore. but you know, they'll use underneath roads and stuff. But there is a lot that needs to be addressed underneath those within the ravine system. So that could also be an option of what could be occurring in the Don Valley.
I don't see anybody else with their hand, but I have a couple more. So we know that in Toronto they built over a lot of rivers. John will be next, yeah. And so when you think of, I know the Christie Pits, that area there, Cudmore Creek right near Manor Road, Tattle Creek in the downtown. There was a pond beside Philosopher's Walk, and as you talk about all this flooding, so that causes problems. And also we sort of have an idea that we used to have a lot of exposed earth at one time, and we put cement on that earth, and then hence it doesn't take probably a climate scientist to realize that we took something that was permeable and we made it semi-impermeable. Hence, more. What's your comment? Or should we uncover all the rivers? I'm not sure how we would ever do.
Yeah, that discussion's been had. I don't think it's really feasible. I mean,
Right.
they've tried to acknowledge the existence of the rivers by placing like public art.
Right.
I don't know last time you were down at Trinity Bellwoods, but there's a blue colored, I don't know if you'd call it tilings, but it's like a blue, I guess there are tiles within the sidewalk.
Right.
Which used to show its route. That might be Garrison Creek, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, they're underneath there, and I don't see them coming up anytime soon. Maybe portions of them.
Right.
But I don't see them, like they call it daylighting. I don't think they're going to daylight that anytime soon.
I saw Joan Bigley with her hand up. Joan, what's your question?
Two things. Kelly, I think there's a book called The Lost Rivers.
Yeah, there is.
And it's great. And it outlines sort of like by area of all the lost rivers from like Parliament and Sherburne of where they are. And it sort of, as you said, there's signage outlining them. And when you do the discovery trails and all that, they do another set of paths just to show where those lost rivers have been.
Yeah.
So just to comment on that. And the other question I was going to ask you is, like for all the condos that are being built, like there's going to be 3 in my area at Davisville, Mount Pleasant coming up. Then do they look at green space, that kind of thing that you're talking about to compensate for the amount of land development that occurs? Like, is there a ratio percentage for every condo to?
Yeah. There's, okay, if I understand correctly, I'll give you 2 things. There's the building itself, the site itself, and the city will look at the design of the site and the proposal for the site. And first of all, the building will have to meet the Toronto Green Standards. So it's going to be much more sustainable today than it would be, say, 12 years ago or 15 years ago. So those buildings are going to be themselves, the building will be more sustainable. And then there's around the site, there's requirements for green space and landscaping and so on through the zoning and through TGS. Depending on the scale and the size of the development, Parks gets involved at a certain point, at a certain square meter of size. And it sounds like they would be involved in the ones you're describing. And what they do is they do a calculation and they say, well, you need to either provide, and the options are to provide parkland within the site or close by or somewhere, within the vicinity, or they give something called cash in lieu. And that cash goes into a fund that Parks has control of that does improvements, expands, sometimes can even purchase property to add to parks and so on. So that's the process that it goes through. I think the example of was an improvement to that park on Moore. I don't know what the where you just get past Mud Creek and you're almost to Mount Pleasant, and it's on the south side. And they recently put in a really nice splash pad and and fencing around it. They really improved it. And so I would imagine that that's something, that would be another method, and that would have come out of something called Section 37. And so that's in the Planning Act. And so that allows the city to calculate a percentage of what we call community benefits that the developer is required to pay in order to help mitigate the increased pressure on the services and parks and libraries, community centers, and so on, the increased pressure that the population that they're going to be providing homes for will bring. Does that make sense? Like the more people that live close to that park, the more people will use it. Yeah. And so that's one way we improve the parks. Yeah. And then as far as dedicating parkland, it's sometimes they do it on the site because sometimes a part of the site isn't usable, like in terms of the building, but they still own that portion. And sometimes parks will, they'll take that over, or they'll require certain types of, maybe there'll be a privately owned, what we call a privately owned public space where it's privately maintained and owned, but the public can go there and have lunch or whatever. It would be almost indiscernible from a regular park, except the sign wouldn't be there, that, the little signs they have for a park. So does that help answer?
Yeah. It does. It gives me more insight. Thank you.
Yeah, and often there'll be notices sent out to, if you're within a certain distance of the proposed development, you can always go, and then that's always a good question to ask, at a community meeting.
Yeah, and I think that's the next time, like when Josh Matlow or whoever the counselor is and has the town hall meetings. Now it's giving me something more to be more educated about when asking.
Well, Josh is amazing.
Yeah, he is.
I think he's a fantastic counselor, and well, he's sort of a friend as well. Like he's lectured at my class before. He's come to Manor Road a couple times.
Yes, yes.
But yeah, so I would, if that's within his ward, then I would be up to Josh to get that built. I'm not sure if that park is in his ward though.
I don't know, but like I said, it gives me just more insight in general when I'm looking now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So another question is, when you think of the common pattern of building condos nowadays, seems to be to build a 3 or 4 story pedestal and then a taller tower. Now, I'm not an engineer or an architect expert, but one could think, instead of building a patio for the condo people, which essentially was what they do, they build these horizontal cement pads with barbecues and whatnot. Now, they could build, there could be a space for people, but they don't seem to be, there's not a drive to make that green space. Like you don't see a perennial, something beyond a lawn, or even you could have woolly thyme or something like that. What do you think is, I know the developers wouldn't really want to do that, but what's preventing the city from mandating that, to your thought? Or is it not on their radar? Yeah.
No, we've actually mandated that.
Okay.
We asked for a podium. It's a couple of different things.
That's a podium, yeah.
It's a couple of different things that come into play there. So you don't want to the streetscape when you're, walking along it. You don't want it to be too imposing. Wow. So you have a podium, because the building's essentially going to, let's say it's 50 stories tall. To have a 50-story building bumping up against the street, which you can see in downtown, or you can see in many American cities. Like there's the Empire State Building, there's no podium and it's straight up right there, right? And so we require a podium, and then it steps back, and it gives one a sense that you're not being imposed on. And so it also, as you said, provides some amenity space up there for the dwellers of that tower. And then you concentrate the tower. There's actually tower separation distances that are required, podium separation distances. But there's setbacks that do require areas that could be used as green space. But it gets a little complicated. Like this one over at I guess you'd call it Hillsdale and Bayview, between Hillsdale and what's that one? It's right here. It's
Sudan.
Sudan.
Yeah. Okay.
That one there, it's going to have retail at grade.
Right.
And so there's no real opportunity to really green it in front. But they're going to have retail, which will, hopefully be successful and liven up that part of Bayview and so on. But yeah, so the city does require that. There's a podium, a tower, and it's meant to not be so imposing. And then it also has issues related to wind.
Right.
Now, these big tall towers, if you just build a big tall tower, the wind hits the tower and goes straight down the tower and into the sidewalk. And it creates an environment that is very unpleasant. So now the wind will hit the tower and shoot down and hit the top of the podium, and it doesn't get to this. So in a storm, windy day, the street isn't like, it becomes like a hurricane down there if it's straight up and down. So that's why, another reason why we require that.
Now, not to monopolize questions, Debbie, you haven't asked a question. You're always like me, a million questions. No thoughts coming to mind? No, not.
Well, I mean, well, it's like I put in the comments, with Black Creek. I mean, just heavy rainfall and it becomes like a raging river. So I'm not really sure where it flows into, maybe into the Humber?
I think so.
Yeah? Okay, because you sort of lose the trail of it once you get to Shepherd. So it must be all underground.
I wonder. That's a good question.
Yeah. I see Judy Gasper wants a question. Judy.
Yeah, hi. Sunnybrook Plaza. There's a river that goes along the north side of Eglinton under Metro. And there's some word that Sunnybrook Plaza, when they rebuild it, they're going to have trouble with the underground water. Do you have any idea?
Well, I don't know about that river. I don't doubt it at all, because there's lots of ravines in it. Well, I guess it would just flow down to that's the West Don over there, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, although I do know that application was submitted many years ago, like several years ago, and it's totally stalled. So maybe there's like environmental, like maybe there's some real challenges to the rebuild, because I think that plaza is the first car plaza like that in all of Toronto.
It's the first, it's 75 years, the first strip plaza that was built. And when I was a kid, I sang a song on Bing Whittaker's club in that plaza. I've never forgotten it. And I was so sad to see it being ripped down.
Yeah, it's just like talking about that plaza. The heritage planners, they were trying like crazy to come up with a way to save it, but they couldn't, because like it's hard to do a plaza like that in terms of the criteria for heritage buildings, because they change, the tenants change so much. So it's not like the Hudson's Bay has been there for 150 years or whatever it is, however long there. So it's challenging to find that, because they have all kinds of stores over there. But yeah, I live right across the street from it, basically.
So Kelly, you started with a very interesting piece about the melting of the Greenland ice, and I mean that brings us to the macro level. The question I might ask is, so what is the melting of the ice, not only the Greenland ice but the other ice, do the salinity of the water, and how does that what impact on climate and I guess currents and other bits? Is there a short answer, long answer?
Well, I think it's a long answer, but I don't necessarily have it. I know that is a concern for climate scientists. I know that if you were to take all the ice sheets and melt them, it would certainly have an effect on the salinity of the water, which would affect currents and who knows, tides. I'm not sure exactly, but it's a serious question. Like I wasn't trying to suggest that the entire sheet had melted. It's just that the top of it, it's slushy or soggy, right? And so it's starting to melt. And the images that I've seen from Greenland, some of them are like, it's like a huge temporary river coming out of the bottom of these glaciers, right? Pouring into the ocean. So it's serious business, but I don't necessarily have a good answer.
Okay, well, we're having the same issue with our Arctic.
Yeah, no, well, it's part of,
I mean, and look at all the discoveries they're making in Alberta,
Yes.
in the mountains with the ice cap melting.
So Kelly, what can we do locally? I mean, you mentioned talking to Josh Matlow, perhaps Jay Robinson. That's the municipal level, but I guess that's probably, I think globally, act locally.
Well, okay. I talk to my students about this because that's a huge question. Because right. the climate change seems like an absolutely overwhelming challenge.
We're not all Greta. I mean.
And no, but the thing is that it can't happen unless everyone does something and governments do something. And so, like, what can you do? I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, you can reduce the amount of impermeable surfaces on your property. I guess you could put rain barrels out, collect the water. You know, as long as they're carefully, as long as they don't breed mosquitoes. You can reuse rainwater. You can store it. Like if it sits in place, it's safer in terms of damaging the infrastructure. You know, I think it's all pretty intuitive. I think that like knowing everyone at Manor Road and so on, I can imagine that like I'm preaching to the choir. So pardon the pun, I guess, but it's just, you know, I don't know. It's like hard to say. I think that, you know, individual choices matter, right? But so do governments. And so, you know, you could pressure politicians, like you said, and talk to them about it. Let them know that you're concerned about that, you know, and so on. It's hard though. I mean, you can hear for a while there, climate change dropped off the map, right? For the first like almost year, I think, but it's coming back a bit now in terms of news stories because the pandemic consumed everything. And now it's sort of like, now climate change is coming back. But I like to hear the government talk about reorganizing the economy in a green, but I mean, to me, it always seems these dates are so far away, but whatever.
Isn't some of this climate change natural phenomenon?
Well, I think certainly.
Like, I mean, how many ice ages has the world been through?
No, that's absolutely true.
They also go through global warming. You know,
yeah, I think the difference is that, you know, if a climate scientist would answer you by saying it's the speed at which it's happening, and it's the cause. It's the cause. So you're right. Absolutely, there have been ice ages because we know this, and there's been several, I think. But the thing is that the speed at which it occurs, I think, is the difference, and the cause. It's all anthropocentric. It's all human caused. All of these reasons, like the release of fossil fuels. So, you know, if a meteorite, if there are no humans, and a meteorite came and hit the Earth and caused a global ice age, well, that would be something different, you know, a different cause. The thing is, we can control this cause, is what the argument is. And so at least we can control it. I don't think we can stop it anymore, but it seems that we can control it. And, you know, it's kind of important to think of it like that.
Maybe reduce the speed of it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's it. Reducing the speed, adapting. You know, I mean, electric cars are going to have a big impact. And all the way we build our buildings, we'll see if we get retroactive in terms of retrofitting buildings to make them more sustainable or greener designed and so on. But, you know, who knows? I mean, but I'm sure, I know people who are completely cynical about it, and then people who are totally optimistic. I would think I'm somewhere in the middle. I mean, I'm hopeful because I've got, you know, little ones, but, no, I mean, I don't know. It seems like, I think things will come around, I'm hoping. But it's the speed at which it happens. It's remarkable how quickly we change the climate if you really think about it. It's like a couple generations, maybe 3, right? I don't know.
Well, to your point, there was that noted because we weren't driving our cars, the visibility in many of the global cities was remarkable.
Yeah.
And I think there were the animals, because we weren't even on the streets, they were coming out
Yeah.
And I think there dolphins were someplace, and there were deer on the beach area and other areas too. And
yeah, there's been some benefits to it. I think there's more birds this year for some reason. I don't know.
yeah,
I'm just
Oh,
maybe
really?
imagining. Well, I don't know. I think I'm just imagining it. I'll go out and walk around and stuff. And in the mornings, Talbot Park is just alive with
yes,
hundreds of birds. It's just incredible. But,
I've noticed more rabbits than normal. Yeah.
I saw a groundhog the other day.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just, I mean, I've never seen a groundhog in Toronto. But I should say, guys, I have to run in a couple of minutes.
Well, it's been amazing, Kelly. It's remarkable. We were talking about your tool library talk a couple of months ago, and we'll more about that hopefully once we open up.
It's been fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly.
Fascinating, thank you.
Well, it's really nice to see you guys.
Well, thank you. Susan, do you want to bid us adieu and tell us about what's next week?
You're the one who knows what's next week.
Okay, so we have actually Debbie Danbrook, who's coming to share with us about Beltane and walking the labyrinth. So we've had Debbie before, and I'm not sure, Kelly, if you've run into Debbie Danbrook. She just lives on Bayview as well, near Moore. She plays the shakuhachi, the bamboo flute. Yeah. So thank you again, Kelly, and thank you again, everyone. And get outside when it's not raining, or even when it's raining. It's always good too. And have a good rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, guys.